channel. Thank you guys for tuning in. Today's video is going to be a comparison between the SteelDive 6105 and the San Martin 6309. Now, it actually didn't occur to me to do a comparison between these two models. In the video for the San Martin 6309, you notice I compare it against the Seiko reissue turtles. The only reason I've done this video is due to the release of this video. I had quite a few subscribers describing or comparing the SteelDive 6105 versus the San Martin 6309, and I think the main qualm that people had was the actual price difference. So this review or comparison, should I say, is going to be slightly different to my usual comparisons. I have a comparison template which I made a while ago. Just thought it'd be handy, and what I'm going to try and do is, by using a scoring system, I'm going to try and quantify the value add features of both watches. So what that basically means is we're not going to look at subjectives, we're not going to look at aesthetics in terms of what somebody might think is better. So we're going to try and do a purely objective review. Now, value add, what is value add? A value add is defined as anything done to an item or something which changes or adds an attribute to it. So we're going to break down the features of the watch as per my template. So you've got dial, crystal, bezel, case, bracelet, etc. And whichever one has a value added feature or has, machining done to it, anything like that, that's going to score a single point. And obviously which one hasn't, there won't be a point against that feature. Now, towards the end, we're also going to weigh that up with a VFM evaluation, which is a value for money evaluation, where we compare the price and versus the points and evaluate overall if it is ultimately worth it. So this is a different approach I'm taking. Hopefully you guys appreciate it. And obviously the scoring system, I've tried to keep it binary, zeros and ones, keep it minimal to just remove that subjectivity, because subjectives, it's difficult quantifying subjectives because the watch game reviews, so much of it is what you like, what you don't like, etc. So let's try and keep it something which we can actually number and it makes sense to everybody watching. So without further ado, let's get into it. So for the purpose for this review, I have the SteelDive 6105. This is the version 1. This is my personal watch. Love this and I've kept this. Now what we have is version 2, however this is the sterile version. So when we address the logo features, we'll go back to version 1 and I'll make a few cross-reference points between the two. And then we have obviously the San Martin 6309. I'd like to start off with the dial and let's have a look. Now there was a significant change between version 1 and version 2. Now in my opinion now, because I get the version 2 SteelDive, I get loads of them in regularly, and I think they did do a cost saving exercise just from the get-go. There are slight differences between 1 and 2 which I've covered in a separate video. I believe on certain features they reduced the cost on a few things. Okay, so I might go between these two here. First thing, let's look at my first category I'm looking at is the dial. I've broken it into 7 different features. Okay, just show you what I'm looking at here. So I've gone from indices, minute track, how are they printed, whatever applied, and then we've gone to the hands, the finish and style. We've looked at the logo, is it printed, is it applied, we've looked at the date window, if there is one, yes or no, the color, finish, alignment, loom, and obviously if there's any additional features. So between the two, let's have a look at the indices or any minute tracks. So between the 6105, let's pick up version 2 and the San Martin. So first thing you'll see is there's a printed minute track on the left hand side and of the 6105, and the San Martin, the 6309, there is no minute track, but this has a chapter ring and this has a unmarked chapter ring. Second, let's look at the indices or the hour markers. So between the two, they both do have applied markers with a polished outline. There is a slight difference in terms of the thickness of the markers, the shape, how long they are, but there is nothing significant between them that shows one is overly better than the other. Like I said, they're both using pretty similar features, and they both have a printed text at the 6 p.m. location. Compare that to version 1. Again, same situation, slightly different shape to version 2, but the features are the same. So for both, they've, on the indices side, they both score 1 point. Let's look at logos and the fonts. So with the SteelDive, because that's sterile, I'm not going to pick the version 2 up, but the version 2 with the logo has a printed text, whereas the San Martin does indeed use an applied logo, which is highly polished. So automatically that is a value added activity. They've, you know, added cost to the dial. So applied, polished versus printed, obviously one costs more than the other, which is the applied one. So the 6309 gets 1 point and the SteelDive gets 0 for that. From that, let's look at little features like date windows. So obviously dials without date windows and dials with date windows, there's a difference, it's an added feature, so it'll cost more. Both fortunately do have date windows. The one on the SteelDive is slightly, SteelDive is edgy, it's a lot squarer, and the one on the San Martin is slightly curved. Hopefully you can see that. I don't know what kind of focus I'm getting. Then let's look at the color of the dial, or the finish. Alignment for the most part on both dials is pretty good. Everything is where it should be and it lines up pretty well. The finish on the dial, so with the SteelDive, both version 1, 2, it is a matte effect dial, but whereas on the San Martin you've got a glossy black dial, so there's an extra layer applied just to give it that deeper black and a bit of a shine to it. So for that, the San Martin will get a point and the 6105 will not. Let's look at the lume applied. So there is a lume difference between the first version 1, version 2. Version 2 is slightly poorer. I think version 2 they've just used a C3 lume, and the San Martin it uses Swiss C3, much stronger lume. So naturally the San Martin on this one will get the point. And we're looking at chapter ring. So the chapter ring on the SteelDive, both versions, it's just plastic, plain, there's no additional markers on it, whereas the San Martin does have it still is plastic, but it does have markers. Again, they've added to it, so that's going to score a point over the SteelDives. Let's have a quick check and let's compare the lume. Now, just to get this lume, I have used UV lamp. I don't like to usually use a UV lamp because I don't think that's quite representative of what lume will look like under normal daylight conditions. That is what level of lume you normally get. You don't get the same lume when you use a UV lamp, but you can just clearly see now. So there is a difference between version 1 and 2. There's a slight difference in shade, but I can confirm, even though the second one, version 2, does look a bit brighter, it actually isn't as bright. It doesn't capture the light well enough in normal daylight. And the lume on the 6309 is all BGW9, and you can see the bezels on both SteelDives are illuminated, and the one on the 6309 doesn't have any lume. So initially I think I did make a mistake when I spoke about the San Martin saying it had Swiss C3, it just has BGW9. Whereas the SteelDive has normal C3. And the last thing on the dial we're going to look at is obviously the hands. So there is a slight difference between version 1 and 2, and this further backs my argument that they did do a cost saving exercise. Now this is going to be, let's see if I can show this. Now on the version 1 you'll see the hands are polished, yes, and they are slightly thicker. Just pay attention to that seconds hand, traffic light, and that's where you'll see the difference. Now on version 2, just look how flat they are. So some of that 3D effect has gone. And if you look at the traffic light hand, again, very flat, polished. Now compare that to the San Martin. There is a lot more that has gone into the actual handset. Now, if we leave, because in the 6309, my criticism of this handset was they are disproportionate. The minute hand, sorry, is a bit long, is a bit thick towards the stem, and it does cover the hour hand when they cross over significantly, where you can just about see it. So that being said, if we just leave that, let's look at the actual finishing and the machining present on the actual handset. You'll see you got central brushing, and you've also got the edges. They are chamfered and the polished edges. And in the original video, I did a microscopic close-up, and you can see, you know, the cutting on the actual hands, pretty good. Also, you've got this extra little feature on the second hand where you've got this button top and a lollipop second hand, where you can't actually see the pinion hole, and on the 6105 you can. Now you can bring a subjective into it, meaning obviously the hands on the 6105, they're there because they want to resemble the Captain Willard, the original, and be a close homage. I understand that, but if we just look at purely, as we said, we set out in the start of the review, let's look at just the value add feature. You'll see clearly the San Martin does have a lot more machining done to the hands, and overall a better handset. So the point for the for the hands will go to the San Martin for this one. So where are we currently? Let's have a quick look. So currently, this is how I've scored them. For the dial, San Martin gets a 7, and the 6105 gets a 2. Second thing we're going to look at is the actual crystals. Now the version 2, I'm not much of a fan on the improvement they did on the crystal. Yes, they added AR coating, but for me, it's a flat sapphire crystal. It sits oval flush. It sits a little too proud for the case, and to me that isn't a good fit and finish, as I believe it should sit somewhat in line with the actual case. Compare that to the San Martin. You've got a double dome AR coated sapphire crystal, and the fit and finish is so much better and in line with the case. Both do have a slight chamfer around the edges. I'd say it is very minimal. I'd like to see just a bit more chamfer, but you know, there we go. So on that side, of course, the crystal gets the point. I've given, so they could get possibly 2 points here. So on the style coating, the crystal for the San Martin takes it, because the double dome crystal obviously is more expensive than the flat AR. Fit and finish, obviously the San Martin gets a 2nd point for that, whereas the SteelDive doesn't. So you've got 2-1 on the crystal. Let's move on to the bezel. Now this one is a tricky one. I'm still trying not to be subjective about it. So the style, one is a coin edge on the left, and on the right you've got SKX style bezel. I'd say it's probably like a stepped style. The original had a coin edge, but slightly different to what is on the version 2. So fit and finish on both, pretty good. There's no excessive movement. They're both pretty solid. And in terms of rotation, the San Martin is very tight. Obviously precise as well, aligns really well. There is literally zero back play. Now on the movement on the SteelDive, this bezel in particular is actually very good. You've got like half a click's worth of back play. So if you go by the clicks, it won't align, but you just literally go one forward and just rotate it back, that half a click to make it align. Now my issue with the SteelDive with this one is I've had literally, you know, loads, tens and tens of SteelDives in my hand, and they have a real issue with consistency. Usually they tend to get a hot spot around the 10 to 12 hour markers. Around there they do get slightly stiff, you get slight change in sound. However, this one is really good, but I know that just from experience with this watch. I've had 2 of these so far. The consistency is pretty much the same. Bezel inserts, both use ceramic, so both get a point for that. And on the SteelDive, you've got a fully loomed ceramic bezel insert, as you saw in the loom shot. And on the San Martin, you have only the 12 o'clock loomed pip. However, the added value on the San Martin is, sorry, just too much SteelDive San Martins, too many S's flying there. You've got this inset pip. Now, you don't see this much on watches. Usually they go with the stock-on pip. Now, obviously, for this type of pip on a bezel insert, there had to be some extra work undertaken. So they both are pretty even here, and the only reason the San Martin got an extra point, so there's a 4-3 score over here, is just due to the consistency of the bezel action compared to what I know on the 6105. Moving on to the case, both have a similar type of case. Both is a turtle / cushion. Technically, it's a cushion style case, and interestingly, the 6105 was not actually known as a turtle. It was known as a Captain Willard. The name turtle had not been associated with this 6105 as of yet, and we know this is a straight homage of the 6309. Finish, both do have a brush finish. I try to see, there is a very slight difference in finishing, although I think it's too slight to actually call out. And interestingly, the actual version 1 had a much better brush finishing. It was a lot smoother. You actually can't feel the brushing as much, whereas on the 6105 you can feel the brushing, you can feel the individual strokes, if you will, and you can to a certain degree on the 6309. So both get a point for that. Comfort, yes, very comfortable. The whole case shape is very comfortable. And then moving on from there, we look at the case backs, the finishes on the case back, logos, both, but this is a sterile one, so let's look at the SteelDive one. You've got some sort of engraving on the back, some style. Now, I'm not fully familiar with every style of manufacturing or every process, so I'm trying to use the best of my understanding here. I really do like the one on the 6309. It's a lot more OEM like, and you've got a brushed finish on the back, you've got a polished one, and you've got polished sides on both cases. So generally, and I have said this before as well, both watches, I praise the 6105 for the actual build quality of the case, very well made, and they both have the build quality present in both cases. So between the two, the engraving, I won't comment on that. They both get a point because I think it's subjective whether you want a logo, whether you want specifications. Some people like both, some people like a mix. The San Martin have just tried to go closer to the actual Seiko original. And the last thing is, let's look at crowns. So the crown fit, finish, function is good on both. Both of them are pretty solid crowns. Touching it, I feel the crown on the 6309 is slightly thicker in terms of the thickness of the material or the steel. However, the SteelDive does come with a signed crown option. So if we use that same analogy of value added, there's a bit more value added to the crown purely because they have machined it, which will increase the value of the part. Now, when I say all these increases in value, it may not be anything significant, but usually with China, when they're manufacturing and you're dealing with the factories, you need to have minimum order quantities of 300 or more. So even if it's one part might cost you, I don't know, £1.22, and then with a certain feature, now it's going to cost £1.28 or £1.32, whatever. Just small increases, nothing significant on the single piece, but overall, if you're making 300, 500, it is going to definitely increase the cost. And usually in manufacturing factories, they look at the small costs here. So between the two, on the case, they both scored the same. They both got a point for each of the category in the case. So type of case, finish, comfort, crown, and case back finish, they both score 5. Let's look at bracelets and straps. So the thing with the SteelDive, the point will go to the SteelDive for this one. Just the fact that because they have a stainless steel option, and they don't charge any extra for it, and they've got a whole host of other options for the bracelets and straps, whereas so far the San Martin only has this silicone strap. It is a good quality strap. It's got the logo on the bottom. You've got pretty decent buckle as well. However, they don't do a bracelet. Now, San Martin being San Martin, if they did a bracelet, they would charge you for it, whereas SteelDive doesn't add anything extra. However, I would say San Martin has every right to charge for it, because we've seen the bracelets on their watches. They are very exceptional. So it's, you know, worth paying for. So on the bracelet side, San Martin scored nothing, and SteelDive scored 1. Now, we're hitting the last category now, which is the price. So we're only going to use the AliExpress platform. So the lowest I've seen the SteelDives is at 99. However, when you do a quick search, you'll see Addies sell them low as 85. Now, it is the same watch, everything's exactly the same. I think Addies just probably buy off SteelDive, or they use the same supplier for the dial. So price, let's just go to around £85 between the two. And the San Martin at the moment is sitting at 170, although in the sales you can get it a bit lower. But let's look at just normal price factor. Okay, now let's start weighing this up. So the way I've done it is the totals at the bottom. We've got 18 for the San Martin and 12. So there is a 6-point difference. So how does that relate to the price? So the price for the San Martin 170 and it's at 85. Right, it's almost double. Yeah, and that roughly equates to around 10 or 15 pounds per point. That's ridiculous. So we look at the highest scoring category on these watches, and that was the dial. So we can, you know, quantify that the only major difference between the two is the fact that it's the dials. So then let's break it down now. Is a dial worth 70, 80 pound more? Not really. I can't say it is, especially the fact that they're such standard dials. They're not meteorite dials. There's nothing really exceptional about the two. Yes, the San Martin is a much better dial, but I think this just goes to show the main difference between them. But yeah, on the price wise, it's not justified at all. The 6105 is the better value for money item. However, let me stop you there. There is a problem with the pricing of both watches. I personally feel SteelDive have their prices for the 6105 is too low. They have devalued the life out of it. Now, this is because they got very popular very quick. Initially, when I did my first review, when I bought my first SteelDive, it was around the £120 mark, give or take £10. Now, the value that this should be at is 120, in my personal opinion. And I'm not talking just from a consumer's perspective. I'm looking at the market as well. Now, you've got Heimdallr, you've got San Martin, you've got a whole host of other companies that produce the 6105 case, and SteelDive beats them all. And I think this happened is because SteelDive supply to anyone and everyone. And because they started supplying to so many agents, the agents started to undercut SteelDive. And you can see this on the AliExpress store. I mean, I follow you all the time, and I personally deal with SteelDive as well, because I buy quite a few watches from them. And speaking to SteelDive, I think this goes back a couple of weeks. They actually did say that they were thinking of increasing their prices because it's too cheap. They've realized that. The only reason they've realized that is there's one important factor which I didn't factor into this, and it's the QC. Now, QC in itself is a non-value added activity because it doesn't change the attribute of anything, or it doesn't add to any part. However, it is an essential non-value added activity. Now, that being said, we know how common it is that the SteelDive does have QC problems. So obviously, the reason they can produce watches so cheap is, number one, they've got really next to nothing quality. Maybe not next to nothing. They must have some sort of QC, but it can't be as good. Maybe they've got the one inspector sitting there checking everything, or they're not trained or whatever. There's definitely a deficiency there. With San Martin, you hardly hear about any QC issues. They have QC issues. QC issues are present everywhere, from the best manufacturers to obviously the worst. But there is stricter control on San Martin. To date, I have purchased, I'd say, about 20 San Martins, and I've purchased, I don't know, I've stopped counting the SteelDives. I've purchased well over 50, and I've come across a lot more QC issues on the SteelDives. I've returned numerous, and you know they are good, so they will return and refund. Now that is the problem. That is why they want to increase the prices, because they're giving them so cheap. They don't actually expect to follow through with the quality of it and the warranty, which is unacceptable. So, you know, you're selling a watch really cheap, and then now you're having to return it, now you're having to refund it, now you're having to pay for return postage. So that's when you feel it, which is rightfully so. They should feel it, so they should be able to work out, you know, poor quality has a cost associated with it, so they should be able to work out is how much money do I need to invest to increase the quality and reduce those returns and defects. You know, my job is a quality engineer, so this is what I do for a living. That's why I've taken this kind of approach to this comparison. San Martin, like I said, I've not had any issues. I know there are people that do have issues, which is absolutely, you know, it's fine. It is what it is. You do get problems. Now, pricing, where do I think the San Martin is? San Martin, I've said it from my first videos, and my opinion has not changed. The fact they are overpriced significantly on the most part between all the brands, and even amongst the, you know, the higher brands, not higher as in price, as in just the better quality brands, so like Proxima, Heimdallr as well. So out of the top four that I normally talk about, SteelDive, usually if you were to rank them 1 to 4, SteelDive will be at the bottom. Third will be like Heimdallr. Second, Proxima. For me, Proxima and San Martin are very close together, very, very close. And San Martin, if I were to break it down like this, they would just steal it just by the bracelets, to be honest. And now, the Heimdallr, SteelDive, they are very close. Heimdallr do some really exceptional watches, and also they do some poor watches, which is a result of just poor parts quality, should I say, or poor assembly. So San Martin, yeah, they do really well. They try to put themselves on top of the podium, but then I want to know how different are they, and that's why I think I came up with this template here to make it possible to see how different, how good, how much better, San Martin really are. So I think they're overpriced. I think this 6009 tops should sell for 150. That's my value on it. And I'm looking at both sides of the fence. I'm looking as a consumer and as a business. So if I would sell this, I'd say that is the figure I should be aiming for, and that's maximum. If I start going into the 160s, 70s, 80s, there is too much of a gap between my nearest, you know, between the competitors. Obviously, SteelDive will always win then. Yeah, that's it. So they are overpriced, and I'd say SteelDive are underpriced. And you know, both are looking at it differently, and I think there needs to be some sort of middle ground here. And whether or not you agree with me, it's a different story. That's just my personal opinion on the matter. Now, on paper now, obviously we've established the SteelDive is better value for money. Cool, that's fine. Now, in my 6309 video, there's a reason I never compared it to the SteelDive, because number one, they're not the same watch. And I wouldn't really like to compare between the two. I like to compare like for like. But not saying you can't. I think it's just a bit different, really. But for me, the value for money on this was in comparison to an actual OEM. Because one thing I mentioned in that review, and I really loved about the watch, is the fact that it had an OEM feel. And what I mean by that is there is something missing from these Chinese watches, and that is the final fit and finish. And if I can explain what I mean is, when you hold a watch in your hand, you know, how does it feel? Now, when you hold any Seiko, whether it's a £100 Seiko, whether it's a £600 Seiko, you do feel this smoothness about it. even if the case shape is like the Samurai isn't a smooth case, you know, regardless, there is a level of finishing apparent to the consumer when you touch and feel the watch, and it goes across to the bracelet as well. You don't feel any sharp edges. So let's talk about case in point, the San Martin Submariner. I mentioned this in that review as well. The case has a few sharp edges, and the bracelet is really well done. Don't get me wrong, it's probably the best bracelet on these Chinese brands. So there's that edginess still present, and I really want the brands to focus on getting away from that edginess. And it is about that ultimate, that final bit of finesse, bit of finish on the watches. But I felt that with this in hand. Granted, there's no bracelet, and I gave a really good alternative to a bracelet, but the actual case it just feels it, and anyone who buys this will probably see it. If you are critical on that level about watches, there's different levels of consumers in the watch game. Some people aren't very fussed about a lot of things. Some people like me, enthusiasts, passionate, where you look at every little detail and try to see where each watch is. So my next video on this, I'm gonna compare this first and foremost with the Heimdallr Turtle. I think they are very, very close, very similar in the way they look. Obviously the way they look, but in terms of just the build quality. And then it's gonna be a comparison of all three versus the originals. See how close they get. Even though these are reissues, there isn't much between them, if any at all, in terms of dimensions. So I think it'll be a good comparison between this. Okay, so hopefully, hope you enjoyed the video. Hopefully I clarified or got my intention across what I wanted to do with this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I will see you on the next review. Thank you for watching.